It was a long, sultry summer evening in Leeds, the kind of night that just seems to go on forever until you blink and suddenly it's midday. Nicky's mum was having a party in the back garden of her house on Spencer Place, and it was full of all manner of mad heads and oddballs, hippies and yuppies, posh girls and rude boys. Even a few amiable low-level gangster types passed through during the night. It was wild. It was an optimistic, if slightly naive time, despite the fact that what would become club culture was in the process of being shooed away from the great outdoors into regulated licensed clubs. I'd tell you my theory about the great narco conspiracy between the Tories, the brewing industry and the Colombian drug cartels, but we don't really have the time. Okay, if you insist. By the late 80s, the US cocaine market had reached saturation point. Everyone was at it by all accounts, and like any business facing a levelling off in profits, the cartels had developed new products. Crack was cheap, cheerful and highly addictive, but even with this new improved formula, the cartels were moving as many units as they were ever going to. They needed to develop some new markets. Europe was the obvious place to start, but rave culture in the UK was all about ecstasy. A single pill would keep you up all night. Your average raver simply didn't need cocaine, and they probably couldn't have afforded it anyway. As they sought oblivion via the traditional British weekend pursuit of getting absolutely leathered, growing numbers of people were buying ecstasy rather than the demon drink. Booze was for the morning after rather than the night before, like weed. The big brewers were major donors to the Conservative Party and, exactly like Pablo Escobar, they weren't going to take a dip in profits lying down. They had a word. So you've got the Colombian drug cartels targeting the UK with their wares, and with the best will in the world, they aren't really the easiest things to cope with in fields at night. At exactly the same time, you've got another cartel lobbying the government to get young people into an environment where they'll consume more of their products too. It also happens to be an environment with lots of flat surfaces, which is handy, because as well as giving users an unlimited capacity for talking shit, Charlie allows you to put the booze away like there's no tomorrow. Meanwhile, the quality of ecstasy available in this country dropped dramatically. All just a big coincidence, right? Anyway, we were in this period of transition, but it was early days yet. In Leeds, the stick was being applied liberally by the forces of law and order. About a year earlier, 1,000 people had been arrested at a party up the road in Gilderson. But the carrot of later opening hours was still a few years away. In the meantime, clubs shut at 2 AM, and if sleep was absolutely out of the question, you'd probably end up at Blues in Chapeltown. But not tonight. Why would you go to some skanky blues when you could be in the open air dancing around a bonfire to local hotshots like Dixon, DJ Drew from the Astoria, and Rob Tessera, who was then king of the big Italian piano tune? It went off. Huggy, later to find fame and fortune as a resident at Orbit and then back to basics, but at that time he was a postman in Wakefield. He also DJ'd. Though I'd heard him play hip-hop by Chris Quavers a few times before, tonight was the night that I actually managed to ask him what it was called. Unlikely though it may seem for such a big, balmy, bull-buggering bastard, Huggy had a real lightness of touch. His nimble, intuitive mixing seamlessly merged such genuine rave classics as Neverland by Mato Grosso, Out There by Friends of Matthew, and even Charlie by The Prodigy, into one gloriously correct but tripped out whole. The just so rinky-dink stylings of hip-hop, Masters at Work's first production ever, it transpires, fitted right in. That big bossy bass line just sent me. It was a laugh a minute. Everyone was in various states of randomness, the music was great, and everything seemed relaxed, free and easy. But that night was the first time I saw cocaine on the scene, though it was perhaps as much to do with my woefully low socio-economic status as much as anything else. There was definitely an edge. I was oblivious to the ghostly figures looming out of the shadows, drawn to the bonfire like moths. As well as hosting a thriving sex industry, Spencer Place was also a bit of an open-air drugs market, and Drew remembers various cadaverous crackheads crashing the party like so many extras from Dawn of the Dead. At the time, nobody actually realised that the night was one big metaphor for the evolution of dance culture, or we might have taken more notice. I bought the Record Review bootleg with a dub of hip-hop from Steve Luigi's shop a few months later, but the first few bars of the track were missing, and I was always a little unsatisfied. Huggy had played a vocal version too. Years afterwards I moved to Chorlton in Manchester. On my first day there, I walked into Bus Stop Records, looked in the Classic House section, and there it was, right at the front, under a tenner, second hand but in good nick, original US pressing. Result. A couple of years later, me and Kenny are DJing in Leeds. The party itself is a little bit okey-cokey, and it's sad to see how far downhill Hyde Park has gone. As we negotiate a landscape of dog shit and broken glass, some local kids chuck bricks at us. We go back to someone's house in Headingley afterwards, leave a couple of record bags in the car, and they get robbed. I lose hip-hop as well as many other much-loved vinyl treasures. It was a crappy night all round, really. I ended up buying Hip Hop yet again on Gem a couple of years ago, but it's an Australian reissue which looks like it's been manufactured with about half as much of the vinyl as the copy that I originally had. It's warped, it's not very loud, and it's difficult to cue up. And yeah, I blame the Tories.